Thank you all for coming to this session on journey mapping and remote collaboration. I'm Julie Strothman, and my colleague Matt Dobson will be moderating today. Like Gabby said, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Matt will keep track of the questions and we'll answer those at the end. Matt and I are both user experience researchers and designers at 18F, and 18F has a fully distributed team. So we've spent a lot of time collaborating remotely. I also wanted to say I'll describe the slides as we go in case you can't see them, and I believe an accessible PDF version of the slides was sent out ahead of time. So I hope you all have that if you need it. I think we have a poll. I don't know if we can put that out there, but I am curious how many of you are here primarily interested in journey mapping or remote collaboration or both. So far, it looks like a lot of both. All right, well, great. We're going to cover both. Let's see. There we are. So today we are going to talk about what journey maps are and how they help us. We'll talk about how to facilitate remote journey mapping. And last, we'll talk about using journey maps after you've created them. And I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. So unlike mapping a system, journey maps describe one person's experience of a process. They can have a range of detail from just a few steps to being very complex. So let's say your team has found that over the last couple of years that you're losing job candidates at various points in the process. The purpose of your journey mapping is going to be to understand why candidates leave during the hiring process. Here we're looking at some of the main stages, no nuance yet. We've got research, then apply and wait, then get an offer and accept, and finally start. Journey maps help you draw the picture and map out nuance so you can make improvements. Deciding what to map, sort of what layers of the experience you want to investigate, is an iterative process. We want to show the person's point of view and their experience from the beginning to the end of the process. So here we've got a table view of a simple journey map, breaking down some of the stages into steps. Research might include reading the agency website and talking with former employees. Apply and wait might include editing your resume and cover letter and checking your email daily or many times a day. Of course, if you were doing this for real with your team, you'd want to identify many more steps along the way. We've also started to fill in here additional layers. So we've got a table row for thoughts. Can I do this job? What is it like to work here? And one for channel. Where are the interactions happening? Are they on the agency website, social media, phone call? Journey maps have a variety of these layers, and what you decide to map depends on the topic and what you learn. In addition to the steps, thoughts, and channels, you might have rows for the person's goals, emotions, interactions, hazards, or opportunities. So how do you decide what to include? I'm hoping you all know the answer to this one. Base your journey maps on user research. You really cannot learn about your customer's experience without speaking with them. So without research, you and your team can probably list out the main stages of the process you want to improve. You can probably identify many of the steps, and you might get the order right. And this version of the map is useful. This is your hypothesis. You should validate it with research. Without that research, you'll miss a lot of things, and you may not even realize where your assumptions are showing up in your initial map. Let's look at a finished example of a journey map. This is the Journey to Affordable Housing for Seniors. This is research that was done last October by GSA's Center of Excellence. And at this zoomed out view, we can learn a lot about how journey maps can work for us. For one thing, also, they can be beautiful pieces for sharing learning, but I assure you, they don't start out there, and they don't even all end up at this level. I see in the chat that a few of you may not have the slideshow, so we'll send it out again, the document. Okay, so I think it's really easy to see a lot of beautiful journey maps and get kind of stuck there. You've got a blank screen. How do you get started? And they just, they can start out very simple. But let's take a look at what we're seeing in this highly designed and really layered map. This journey map has three main elements: a row for the journey across the top, then experiences, where they use quotes and illustrations of people, and last, across the bottom, there are emotions. They use a visual vertical scale going from red to green to show a range of emotion. And they also have explanatory text, such as this low point, quote, have to fill out multiple applications even though information is nearly the same. They use a line across the journey map, a line chart, to show those emotion levels. And at a glance, we can see both high points and low points along the way. And these can inform where improvements can be made. So let's zoom in to the first stage and see the journey and experiences rows, a little bit of those. So under each step in the journey, they've included exits, reasons people might leave the process. Like under start application, the exit indicates, quote, there are no readily available homes to move in. They wait and watch for the wait list to open up. So this notion of exits, like we can start to see where things are getting layered onto this map. We have steps, and now we're noting where there are exits along the way. Exits would also be a useful data layer in the example earlier, the journey map of improving the job application process. Here, the quotes convey people's needs and their goals, as well as who they're interacting with along the way. Under the step, learn about housing options, one quote says, I want to find a place near my children with open space and someplace to park my car. And we can also see in the illustrations, people talking to each other. So it shows who they're interacting with along the way. Journey maps help us identify and address core causes rather than symptoms. They help us feel empathy and stay out of judgment. They help us prioritize, and they help us reduce duplicative, unproductive, low-value work. So how do you start and do this remotely? In face-to-face sessions, there are usually lots of Post-its. We have a photo here with a journey map in progress, 4 main rows with 62 Post-its. I might have missed a few. Some circles and arrows, question marks, and some notes outside the main 4 rows. Design collaboration is messy, and it's best when everybody is participating and when it feels natural, like a conversation. When a team starts doing design collaboration for the first time, even in person, it's awkward. And the same goes for distributed collaboration. Skilled facilitation really helps the group move from very awkward interactions to feeling natural and just moving through the process. So when you're planning journey mapping, we recommend planning for 3 separate work sessions and assigning pre-work. The 3 major steps in journey mapping are align on your purpose and determine what to map, break the process down and visualize it, and last, analyze the map to find patterns and opportunities. For these remote sessions, you need to decide your approach and think about both what you're comfortable with and your participants. So are they familiar with collaborating remotely? How about writing together in a document at the same time? So if your team runs design studios and sketches together in web-based tools, you can start with a digital tool that resembles putting thoughts on Post-its and rearranging them in real time. That's not necessary. If this is all new, or if the team's working together for the first time, you can start simple with the tools that are most familiar to you, like a spreadsheet works very well. The tools you use should prioritize collaboration over complexity. Again, you're not starting out trying to have that beautiful journey map. You're collecting your thoughts and the things you know and have learned about the process of using your service or your web app or whatever it is that you're mapping. So which tools are you most comfortable using? Decide whether you'll share your screen or everyone will type at the same time, looking at their own screens. When trust is not yet developed among group members, or there are people with low technical comfort, it's best to have a facilitator or moderator do the scribing. People are less on the spot, and there are less moving parts. Synchronous typing is good when there's a high trust and high technical comfort among the group. And recruit a helper. It's really helpful to have a moderator to be able to keep an eye on the chat, to keep an eye on the time, to assist anyone having a technical issue, and to call your attention to someone who has something to say. Other prep you can do, and there's a lot of prep, which just goes into like making for a comfortable session. So do a tech check. Even if you're like really technically comfortable and you've used whatever screen sharing tool you're using many times, do a tech check and test your tools with your moderator. You can tell participants in advance what tools you'll be using and ask people to tell you if they need help figuring out how they can participate fully. Suggest participants have a pen and paper handy so you can ask them to write thoughts down during the session. And the reason I say pen and paper is that you don't really have to care what they're taking notes on. Maybe it's their computer screen, but the notion that they'll be writing on pen and paper conveys that there are going to be times for them to think to themselves and not have to share. And I think it's that like comfort level that you're not going to be on the spot and having to do things kind of in this public format in your team in a way that you might not be comfortable with yet. So again, I think that's a consideration for a new team or people newly forming as a group. But that's the message that you're trying to convey, is that there's space here. In this type of collaboration, if it's very new for the team, you can schedule a 30-minute drop-in session for people to try out whatever you'll be using. And I recommend putting that on their calendars. Mark it as optional, but that way they get a reminder and they might show up for that practice time. You know, and some won't, and some time at the beginning will go towards, you know, can you hear me? Can you see my screen? That kind of thing that we're all pretty used to. But setting up that 30-minute drop-in time also conveys that you want everybody to be comfortable and be able to participate. Let's see. Okay, so we also want to set ground rules at the beginning of sessions. You really cannot over communicate when you first run distributed sessions like this as a group. It may feel strange, but once you establish a habit of how to collaborate on a document remotely, the awkward parts become unnecessary. In terms of talking, you might choose stay muted and unmute yourself to speak anytime, or type M in the chat and the moderator will call on you, or just type your whole comment in the chat and the moderator will read it out loud. You know, you'd probably use the person's name, and really you're going to pick whatever feels right for your team, but you want to give some guidance so people aren't wondering, how do we do this? Regarding writing, you might choose go ahead and write in the shared document as we go, or I'll be adding to the map on screen as we go. If I don't capture your intent, please let us know. And if you'd rather type comments in the chat, please do. It's helpful to give people that text alternative of typing in the chat. For some people, it's really difficult to jump into a conversation, and even worse online. Okay, so step one, align on the purpose of journey mapping and determine what to map. You'll review together the experience you want to create or improve and identify what you hope to learn, such as the nuance of the process, areas for improvement, core causes of problems, and understanding your customers' needs. Then it's a good idea to do a simple example together if this is your first time journey mapping. It's a very low risk way for everyone to become familiar with what you'll be doing and to get practice in the remote aspects of collaboration. I like a lightweight example that doesn't put people on the spot, and I'll show you what I mean in a moment. And then last, assign some pre-work for step two. So you'll ask everyone to send you a list of the steps in the process you want to map. So you'll have done this lightweight example and people have a sense of what the steps are that you're talking about, and doing that pre-work will get them thinking, and it reduces the time needed in the next session. So let's take a look at a lightweight example. So let's say my friend's thinking about opening an ice cream stand and asks a few of us to brainstorm with them about how to make it great. You may be wondering, is getting ice cream really a journey with nuance? I swear it is, but we'll see. And I do like doing a lightweight, the simple example. You can do one that's related to work, but I feel like if you take people out of the work context and pick something simple that you think everybody has some experience with, it you know, it's also lighter in terms of mood, and that notion that you don't have to be super smart in this moment. We're all just talking about getting ice cream. So let's do a hypothetical example of taking the neighbor's 5- and 7-year-olds for ice cream. I'm in Vermont, where we call them creamy stands, and this photo here shows our local creamy stands, homemade flavors in colorful handwriting on an ice cream cone shaped board. And full disclosure, my daughter worked here for a couple of years, so I was able to get some of her expertise in thinking about the experience of getting ice cream as a 5- and 7-year-old. Okay, I like to start with the steps first, even before the phases. So we have like all the steps and then we're going to group them into the major phases. I like doing the steps first because it's easy to do brainstorm style, where everyone can just throw out ideas. And it's also a good thing to do in a text document before you move to a spreadsheet, because to start, you're going to write things out of sequential order. So get ice cream, eat ice cream. Of course, there's more. If no one says anything, you can prompt with what else and keep waiting. My former manager used to encourage us all to count slowly to 5. Similar to when you're interviewing someone, you're setting the expectation that people will chime in. And he was like very serious about this. When he was presenting, I could see him going 1,000, 2, 1,000. The people are also figuring out who's going to jump in first. So even though, you know, if you're not accustomed to having awkward silences, that counting to 5 feels awkward, but it will get people talking. So anybody want to throw into the chat some of the other things that go into the steps of picking out getting ice cream, eating ice cream? So we've got picking toppings, entering the store, choosing a flavor, selecting toppings, bowl or cone, paying, asking for samples, cone size, do you want a bowl, tasting, examining ingredients, getting enticed by the advertisement, negotiating with the kids on the size of their order. So you can see where there's, you know, can be enjoyable as you're picking out, thinking about all the steps. And let's see, we've got more allergy concerns, allergens, fair, free, organic, grabbing napkins. Do they take cash or credit cards? The creamy stand that I was talking about does not take credit cards. which is kind of amazing. It's a diner. They have not taken credit cards for like, I don't know, all 30 years that I've ever lived here, but they do have an ATM. That's Vermont. Keto, there's another thing that people might be looking for, dairy-free, allergens. So I listed a few earlier. And so you might take a minute to, at this point, you've done some of your steps, and you might take a minute to move that into the spreadsheet. Let's see. And, you know, one thing to keep in mind is that this is not, it's not a performance. It's not like you're doing a presentation where everything needs to be very smooth. You can take your text document and be pasting, and people can be chatting while you're doing that. You can see I've also layered in some thoughts and emotions. This is where I did talk to my daughters about, what do you remember from getting ice cream as a kid, which is of course not as good as going out and doing experiential research and taking 5- and 7-year-olds out to get ice cream and seeing how that goes. However, it's a good way to get some hypothetical thoughts and emotions in there before you get to do your real research. And now we can start to name the stages and see how things are grouped together. Maybe there's an anticipation stage before ordering. Then you've got your eating and your finishing up. But we've also got this row for hazards. We've got, what if I drop it? But I'd like to encourage you to think about this, and this is kind of fun in the context of ice cream, but also really important for our actual work. Thinking about hazards in terms of hazards for the person who is having the experience. So with ice cream, there's the devastation of dropping it if there's no chance of replacement, which is an opportunity for the ice cream stand. If they replace the dropped ice cream in a cup with a cone on top, that's a great way to earn customer loyalty. But back to the imposed hazards. How about if the kid's parent dressed them in really nice clothes and then gets really angry with them when they get them messy? I'm not sure the ice cream stand can prevent this, but it's a good idea to capture as many imposed hazards as you can. And with online services, the stakes can be quite high. If we ran this scenario again with someone who uses a wheelchair in mind, a hazard might be the height of the counter and how you deliver the ice cream. In our interview process, we'd want to include hazards around where outreach happens. Are we reaching a diverse group of candidates? Whether the organization's work to hire and support diverse staff comes across in their materials and their conversations, and their posts about what work life is like on their blog. So that consideration of hazards is one I would encourage everyone to include in your journey mapping, regardless of what you're mapping. Okay, so that was our super simple example exercise from step 1. And I hope also gives you an idea of some of the tips for handling step 2, where you're breaking the process down and visualizing it. Here in step 2, if you had people send you steps in advance, this is where you could already prep them in the spreadsheet, and then you could confirm with the group, you know, are these in the right order, what's missing, and start having people either call things out, put them in a chat, or type in the document themselves in the spreadsheet. And it's also where you can start working on the phases and the thoughts, emotions, and pitfalls and hazards that we just talked about. Then in step 3, you'll analyze the map to determine next steps. What are pain points and opportunities for improvement, or areas for additional research? After the session, you can share the map with people and ask them what's missing. You could do a how might we brainstorm with ideas that came out of step 3. Regardless of the level of visual design you put on the map, you can make it a living document. So, you know, I've seen walls that are covered with a full wall size journey map, and then also just carrying around an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper where you're looking at the map with people as you're doing your work, or pulling it up to review it at the beginning of, say, a prioritization session or strategy work, or when you're planning your user research, and thinking of it as something that you can add to over time and adjust over a long period of time. You may have new versions where you've already made improvements and are seeing how these things change. So that's what I have to share with you, and would love to answer your questions, which I hear we have some good questions.
Julie, that was great. Thank you. We have a ton of great questions that have come in through the chat and a few through some DMs. Before we get that, I want to say that if you need help doing firsthand research on the ice cream problem, that I'm here and that I'm available to support. One question that I think that you mentioned on a little bit on the previous slide was hoping that you could get a little bit more specific, and what are some specific prompts that you might be able to give your team to help them begin to make sense of user research and to start generating ideas from the journey maps?
Sure. So you might have in remote collaboration, let's say that you have done some user research and you have a spreadsheet with all of the data points. And by data points, I mean the things people have said. You might go through and if you've done this work to come up with the steps, whether it's, onboarding, learning, whatever the steps are in the particular process that you're mapping, you might code those comments to the steps so that you could say, okay, let's take a look at what everybody, all the comments that people made about ordering ice cream, and start to look at those to see if there are things to bring forward into the journey map. And so in that kind of world of Post-its, you can see where this would get, there might be 20 comments or 40 comments in a particular area. So your spreadsheet can get quite wide when you're doing the journey mapping. And if it works better for you to be in a document, or if you want to try some online tools to do that, there are quite a few. I've done it in PowerPoint and in slides, just using rectangles with text in them. But also there are some online tools like there's Mural, there's Miro. I've seen Board Thing. I think if you look for, I'm trying to think of what the search term might be. If you look for any of those, you'll find others as well, I'm sure. But I think the question was about prompts. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So what kind of specific things can you ask to start to pull some insights out of the research or generate ideas?
So I'm thinking, when I hear prompts, I'm thinking of the people in the room looking for the things, combing through the research, or just thinking about in their mind what they know. And we really are trying to figure out, what might you be thinking? What might you be feeling? What are you nervous about? Those are the kinds of prompts that come to mind. I don't know if others come to mind for you, Matt.
That sounds great. Those sound like really great prompts for starting to kind of pull out information from people. And I know that when you're working directly with people and trying to get them to describe the process of their day-to-day work, a lot of people leave things out because they seem so commonplace that you kind of overlook the little things that you do. So those are exactly the kind of questions that start to kind of surface the little pieces of detail that may become invisible as we go through things. We've got some other really great questions in here, and one of them's, what are the next steps from a journey map? How does this get used by different audiences? So for devs or product owners or designers, or where does it go from once you've mapped a thing?
Sure. So I think, like you said, it really depends on the audience that you're talking to. So if you're talking to leadership who, say, is pretty distant from the on-the-ground experience that you're mapping, They're maybe looking at the map together and asking, you know, are there things here that surprise you? How does this map align with your thinking about what we're offering? Sitting with, let's say, developers or the whole team while you're doing strategy work, you can go through those kind of how might we exercises where, you know, first you're identifying like this looks like an area for improvement. People are thinking negative things, feeling negative things, or there's a danger there. How might we improve this? What's something we could improve? And I think, you know, along those lines of the prompts, for any of these, whether you're interviewing the end users, the people getting the ice cream, or talking to the team who's working on it, that's sort of like people come up with ideas and pushing for further thoughts, you know, just asking, can you tell me more about that? The very, you know, I think I say that sentence more than any other sentence I say ever. You know, very open-ended questions to elicit more thought are always a good way to go.
Thanks. And we've got kind of a series of different questions that are related around like, how does this journey mapping fit into other types of research? So how does it fit into user research and contextual interviews, and kind of which comes first? There's the interviews and then a journey map, or journey mapping with some hypotheses and then some interviews. Like, how do those things all work together?
I think that the journey mapping is a visualization, a way to make some sense of, and just one way to make some sense of contextual interviews, user research, observations, all of your findings. It's just a way to describe what you're hearing and what you're seeing, all in one place along the process. And I think that there's value in doing it before you've done user research, using it as a midway test during your user research to see, like, what are we not finding out about? There's nothing here about, you know, getting the ice cream. Actually, I don't remember what the step is, but where you're paying for it, we're hearing nothing. We should adjust the research that we're doing so we learn about that gap. And then you also could wait. You could not touch a journey map until you've done a lot of the synthesis and coding of your research. So looking at those data points, all the things that people said, how do you want to code those along? What are the steps that come out of looking at what people are describing and what you've observed, and then put that into a map?
That's great. We've got what I think is both an observation and a question, and it's that I think that it says often journey maps are presented in a linear fashion when people's journeys are not always linear. Do you have any, which I think is very true, do you have any advice on how to map the non-linear journeys?
That is a really good question. In that, I'll scroll back up to that photo of the one in progress on the board, where we see a lot of arrows showing over here on the right. There are arrows showing, you know, sort of a circular going around. And I think I don't have a great answer for you other than sometimes I've seen them presented as circles, or including a lot of those arrows that do show, you know, how this process may be recursive, or there may be forks in the process. And one thing to keep in mind is that this, you might do a whole bunch of mappings. So if we're talking about one person's movement through a process, they certainly also, you can have one person, you know, experience a bunch of areas repeatedly, say going to get your computer fixed and you have to go back 5 times. But it does take out some of the complication of like all of the forks that you might see in a process if you were mapping 3 different people's experience going through the process. So that's why you might do this once for the 5 and 7-year-old, do this for someone who doesn't speak English going to get ice cream.
One particular trick I've seen in maps where things are largely going step by step, but one step itself may be kind of complicated and recursive, as you said, is to be able to have maps that are different levels of zoom. So not just different levels of experience, but to say a little asterisk or footnote to say, let's zoom into this deeper to really understand what's happening in this sort of frenzy of activity in the specific step, and then to be able to zoom out to go in kind of a bigger picture. So so that's another little tip, I think. And then we've got quite a few more questions in here. Let me pull back another one here. Well, let's get back to the communications question. So sometimes these maps, some of the ones you showed earlier, that they're beautiful, and but they also seem like really, really complex. How do you balance that complexity with needing to be able to communicate with people really, really, succinctly, and thinking about, communicating with stakeholders and different audiences?
Good question. I think the key question there, or notion there, is thinking about it in terms of what does the audience need to use it for. So doing a map that fits on a printable piece of paper with a high level of design, even at like poster size, but sort of this map, which clearly, intentionally got that level of design for being able to, I would say, share it with a very broad range of audiences, and to describe the work that happened, to help lots of people understand a lot of nuance here. I think that one of the tactics you can do is to think of it as, to make it large. And what I mean is, like, it doesn't all have to fit. It doesn't have to be beautiful. You want to capture all of the ideas. So it may be a very tall, if you were doing this in spreadsheet form and then moving it to something slightly more visual, it might be taller than fits on a page, so that you can do that zooming in to, like, let's look just at this slice of exploring options, or let's look at the emotions part across the way, or be able to move around the board. So I think, I know for me, I'm usually guilty of including too much content on things. And so thinking of it as layers, and what you can remove depending on the conversation, and how you might create the map in a way that you can remove those extra layers depending on the purpose at hand, is a good way to approach it.
That's great. And we've got another question here, and I think that we may have talked about a little bit, just like mapping. Which is, what are your favorite mapping tools for doing mapping in person? So we asked some of the virtual mapping tools, but what kind of things do we need to bring into our toolkit to do this in person?
I think having a whiteboard and Post-its and Sharpies that people can write on, but maybe also stickers that you can use to sort of annotate, to pick out, like, to code the things, to say this is all related to a particular source, or like these are all about exits. So you can use the color of your Post-it to do that, or if it's after the fact, using some kind of signifier, whether it's just we're going to put stars on all of the ones that represent X, or using stickers is another way to go. Whether you're doing that on a large table surface or a whiteboard, I think taking pictures along the way so that people feel comfortable to rearrange things as needed is also really helpful, and a good way to share out the findings later.
That's great. I want to loop back into the idea of journeys and experiences being complex. Do you have any advice when you're facilitating, this sort of like process research and mapping efforts, to keep participants focused on the journey at hand, and not trying to explain the whole universe in which they live?
One thing you can do, depending on where you are in the process, but if you have a draft of the journey map, one way to focus it is to have people be pointing to places or actually writing on the map itself. If you're in person and tangible that way, that can help keep it focused. And then I think, having a place, particularly like if you're doing remote collaboration, having a clear parking lot place where you can write down, you can acknowledge the comments that people have that are tangential and show that those are being captured, and then ask a focusing question like, okay, we've got this captured in the parking lot for discussion later, or do you have more thoughts about this piece of accepting and moving in, or whatever it is on the map?
That was great, Julie. Thank you. We are getting all kinds of great questions still, and this is another one that kind of relates to the how much. So it says, how do you determine how many experiences or emotions to include in the final document? Are there experiences or emotions that are more important than others?
Ah, hmm. Well, if you're if you're working from research that you've done, so a base of having talked with a lot of people, then you can look for frequency of themes, and are they are they tied to one persona or one group of people? So in our ice cream example, young children might have experiences that are common that you want to pull together, and so that sort of focusing lens of, are you hearing these things frequently? Are they things that you think can be affected by your decisions and how you structure whatever you're offering? And are they related to this particular user group? Do we need another map? And we can include those thoughts or emotions in that other map. And then you may have, you may have your side list of like, you really want to make sure these things are represented, like you haven't figured out a way to fit them in yet, but they still seem really important. So you can interrogate the data again about like, what is this related to? There are ways that we can include it. Should we do a different version where we show a whole different set of thoughts and emotions or hazards or interactions?
That's great. And I think maybe related even a little bit is how do you deal with different perspectives and different interpretations of the same data when you're generating a journey map?
I think that you have a decision point of, are you trying to represent more than one person? So again, back to this, like, how many versions of the map do you do? And you could have sort of two characters that you're following through the process, through the map. Like, I think that it is good practice to keep it pretty narrow. So either one kind of experience or two, where you're not, a journey map's not a great place to show like the whole range of thoughts at a step, but to give examples of a typical experience. And you might have a number of typical experiences, and then you can look at them and say like, okay, we've got these two very different things going on for different people. I think that that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, I think when you're doing something that's role based, or even if you have a persona and you're getting different participants in that are kind of that you're interviewing to get this process, it is good to get those inputs from more than one person to make sure that it's not that it is kind of a combination of a thing in a common experience, and not simply like, to be careful that you don't have an outlier, or that you haven't found like particularly like strong voice or opinion in a room, and to know that like, oh well, I've talked to a handful of people with this same role, and this seems to be the common path through a journey. I think that that's really useful, and of course, like making an asterisk to know that it's not always 100% representative and true for each person.
I'll often, when I'm coding the research, will do some color coding around the frequency, so I can look at a glance at my spreadsheet and see like, okay, everything that's really dark green was something that was expressed by 4 or more people, and if it's light green, it was 2 to 4 people, and if it was, if it's white, okay, I heard it from 1 person, and that helps me figure out what to be showing in the journey maps or in any of the manifestations of the user research.
We've got another question here about emotions, and I think I love questions like this. Regarding capturing the emotions on journey mapping, is there a tried and tested method to how to measure emotion participants at various points in the journey map, or is it subject to the best judgment of the facilitator or researcher? And then can you share what method you use to determine those emotions?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. So I think mostly I don't know. My tack would be to, if this is based on interviews that I've done, is to really prompt for a good deal of detail about like why a person was feeling a certain way and whether or not I'm interpreting what I'm hearing accurately, how they would describe it, as a way to, test for the veracity of what I'm finding. But I don't know if there are, good metrics or sort of measures that are objective. I'm sure that there are, but I don't know.
I think measuring happiness and emotions of any type is a pretty big challenge. I think that this may be a case too for combining methods, where it's if there are places where you're not confident in what people are telling you about emotional state, that may be a place for observation or additional research to validate that.
Good point.
Let's see here. Oh, so one thing I wanted to throw in, and is we talked about journey mapping today, but I know there are lots of different types of mapping. Do you want to talk about like, what's the difference between like a journey map and a service blueprint and process mapping and any of the other number of ways that we like kind of try and describe things that kind of all seem a little similar?
Sure. So journey maps and service blueprints both take a human-centered approach. So they use the lens of people's experience. So we looked at journey maps and we've seen, layering on various facets of a person's experience. A service blueprint does more layering on of all the systems that are involved. So you've got like everything that's kind of visible to the customer or consumer, and then also representing everything backstage, all of the different systems that are involved and where they're interacting, and still lining those up in a similar sort of like following the path of the interactions. I think of more seeing that recursiveness and the forking of situations happening in service blueprints. And another place that we often, we'll kind of map the user research is in personas, and looking at really digging into what's driving people's motivations. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank on one of my favorite mapping methods. We might do a mental model where rather than focusing on a sort of single person's journey or all of the system, the mental model takes a lens of what are the motivations, and so maps out like all the motivations along the process of whatever the service or offering is, and then identifies all of the different tactics or options that are available or ways that people will address those motivations. So you have like the motivations and then the action somebody takes, and then this sort of like stack of what are all the things that the service might offer to address those particular needs or motivations.
Julie, this has been absolutely fantastic. Are there any anything that people forgot to ask? Any last things that you want to talk about before we go? Well, right. Well, I think that is going to be that then. This has been really awesome. Julie, thank you so much. This has been great. And thanks everybody for all these wonderful questions. These are really some challenging topics.
Thank you, everyone.